I wanna be the best there ever was, to beat all the rest. Yeah, that's my cause. The Pokemon franchise as we know it launched in 1996 in the form of a humble pair of Game Boy games, Pokemon Red and Green. Since then, it has grown into the highest grossing media franchise of all time, out-earning Mickey Mouse, Star Wars, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That yellow rat with red cheeks has ruled the pop cultural landscape for the 20-odd years since, and with Sword and Shield recently becoming one of the top 3 highest earning sets of games in the series' history, it doesn't look like Pokemon's domination will end anytime soon. But Pokemon hasn't always been a media darling. In fact, its early years were plagued with intrigue, moral panic, and a lot of concerned parents. So, how did Pokemon go from being a pop culture juggernaut in the making to a subject of fear and confusion? This is the story of Pokemon Panic. Pokemon gotta panic. To kick things off, we have to go back to December 1997, about 9 months before the anime series debuted in the United States. By then, Pokemon was already airing its 38th episode in Japan, and it was one for the history books, because when the notorious Computer Warrior Porygon episode aired, tragedy struck. Viewers across Japan were treated to a sequence of rapidly flashing red and blue lights when Pikachu used an electric attack. What should have been nothing more than an exciting few seconds of television turned into a national panic when over 700 people were stricken ill with symptoms including seizures, vomiting, and eye irritation. As a result, 685 children across Japan were affected, and shares of Nintendo fell by about almost 5%. The Pokemon anime was also put on hiatus for 4 months while Nintendo and OLM, the anime studio behind the series, tried to figure out what the hell had happened. To this day, Computer Warrior Porygon has never been aired on TV again. Unfortunately, it was Computer Warrior Porygon that really brought Pokemon to the international stage. Yikes. 2 days after the episode aired, the New York Times read the headline, "TV cartoons flashes sent 700 Japanese into seizures." The name of the show, Pocket Monsters, doesn't even get mentioned until the 10th paragraph, but even so, this was one of the first times that Pokemon got the attention of the American press. And it wasn't a great first impression. The anime eventually returned to air with broadcasters airing a Pokemon problem inspection report to explain the cause of the incident and apologize for it. If you have 3 minutes to spare, give it a watch. It's got a friendly ass lady explaining why red and blue lights at 24 frames a second caused the illness while being surrounded by Pokemon plushies. Despite the investigation and apology, the Computer Warrior Porygon debacle was just the first of many times when Pokemon would come under scrutiny. If you grew up in the US in the late 90s and were a fan of Pokemon trading cards, you probably know what I'm going to talk about next. Yes, the trading card games, which hit the scene shortly after the video games and anime, was the subject of school teachers' ire within months of its debut. The ripple effect of the card game's release was felt on playgrounds across the country. Kids were getting emotional over losing their valuable cards, and parents had concerns too. And in September 1999, 2 mothers teamed up to file a lawsuit against Nintendo of America, saying that their kids' new obsession was more than just a passionate hobby, but straight up gambling. In their minds, the process of buying more and more packs of cards in the hopes of getting a Dragonite was much like the lottery. A little too much like lottery for their liking. Of course, they could have just stopped buying their kids' Pokemon cards, but we'll leave that logic for another day. Oh, also, the act of buying a bunch of mystery things so you can have a chance to win another thing sounds oddly familiar with something that rhymes with matcha. Anyhow, still, the Pokemon black market thrived on the playgrounds, at least according to sensationalized stories from the time. In October 1999, the LA Times described the phenomenon as trading pits. All across the country, Pokemon cards were banned from schools. According to officials, they were disrupting learning and poisoning playground friendships. Clearly, Pikachu was just tearing people apart from the inside. Teachers and parents also blamed missing homework and missing the school bus on kids' preoccupation with the cards. One principal, not sensing the irony, said, "It's just become such a monster." A pocket monster, you might say. Oh, also, some of y'all might already know this, but Pokemon cards have been a hot commodity for a while, and now they're only getting more and more popular. Fun fact, did you know that a 1999 first edition Charizard holographic Pokemon card in its peak mint condition is worth up to $300,000 US? So yeah, if you've ever gotten your card taken during school, I think your teacher owes you a lot of money. Meanwhile, the core concept of the franchise itself was causing debate as well. As you probably know, Pokemon is a game where you capture different monsters, form bonds with them, and level them up through battles with different trainers and wild Pokemon. Now, the games constantly reinforce the fact that through these battles, you help the Pokemon grow, and the Pokemon help you grow. You know, the lyrics, you know, "You teach me and I'll teach you Pokemon," like the original. Not everyone thought that was a good thing though. One disgruntled mother wrote into the Washington Post calling it animated cockfighting. A writer for the LA Times said the whole competition between trainers starts to look like cockfighting. The Honolulu Star Bulletin described matches like a cross between professional wrestling and cockfighting. Lacking another reference point, many would compare these fictional battles actual illegal and cruel real-life animal competitions. Gotcha. And if you felt like you could maybe go to the movies to take a break from all this gambling, complaining, and cockfighting, you were about to be sorely surprised. Pokémon, the first movie, was released in American theaters in late 1999, a triumphant end to what had been an extremely successful first year in the United States. And Primetime News covered it in an MSNBC segment entitled Pokemania, a term that would become quite common. The Pokemania segment is notable for a few reasons. It's a perfect time capsule of a simpler days, and if you wanted a nostalgia trip, I suggest check it out. We get to see kids loading up plastic bags full of Pokemon cards purchased at their local Toys R Us. A toy expert named Ira Gallen assures viewers that the trend has at least another year before it goes stale, and anchorman Brian Williams poses this burning question: is Pikachu going to be the Furby of 1999? And finally, an actual child psychologist says that parents should not let their kids be near any aspect of the franchise because, as she says, the message is violence. This plea did not work out very well though. So many kids were out of school the first day of the film's release that they dubbed it the Poke-Flu. Burger King also wanted to get a piece of this Pokemon fever. In a promotion worth $22 million, Burger King distributed tens of millions of little Pokeball themed toys with their kids' meals. I'm sure some of you watching at home remember these toys. They were part of a massive promotion and there were 57 different toys to be had. But you may not remember those massive recall that happened after several children tragically suffocated because of a dangerous design flaw with the Pokeballs the toys came in. That is a lot heavier than the other stuff we've talked about, but it shows that not all Pokemon panic was hysteria. Burger King circulated news of the recall in national TV ads, in pediatricians' offices and ERs, and in thousands of its restaurants. With that sad chapter behind us, we can dip back into the sort of Pokemon panic we've grown used to. Questionable moral outrage. Sure, parents, teachers, and even some psychologists had a problem with Pokemon, but they had nothing on the various religious groups who decided that thou shalt not enjoy Pikachu was the 11th commandment. One common criticism was that the pocket monsters themselves were akin to demons. Which, Sure. Another issue is that Pokemon promoted Darwin's theory of evolution, which I guess is bad. Also, I love imagining how someone saw this and went, by the gods, that's Darwin's theory of evolution. Some people even took issue with the way the game sounded, comparing the game's sound effects to the sound of children chanting. But that's not all. Other religious folks were concerned with the game's portrayal of ghosts and channelers, or people that could channel spirits, which you might remember from the creepy Pokemon Tower section of the game. Others found Pokemon objectionable simply because it came from Japan and had references to the culture there, which you can actually get a little taste of in one of our 2-part videos about anime localization. Check it out. And finally, people took issue with what we can all agree is a blessed part of the Pokemon series, the Poké Rap. Because according to them, if you play the Poké Rap backwards, you can hear the words, "I love you, Satan." Now, I played the Poké Rap backwards, and I can safely say that it does not say, I love you, Satan. I don't know, maybe you can hear, who knows. Anyhow, so who could stop this wave of religious paranoia? Who is powerful enough and respected enough that people who hear "I love you, Satan" in an anime jingle would listen to them? None other than the final boss of Christianity, Pope John Paul II himself. Yes, in the wake of the first Pokemon movie's debut in England, the Vatican assured its followers that Pokemon just wasn't worth worrying about. The Vatican went as far as saying that Pokemon had no harmful moral side effects and stating that the game was built around friendship. That's right, Pope John Paul II knew Pokemon existed and had given his blessing. So that's gotta be the end of the story, right? The Pope was like, Pokemon are chill and y'all need to settle down. Anyway, Pokemon transitioned from being the hot new franchise gobbling up all the money in the world to a pop culture mainstay that still gobbled up a bunch of money. Pikachu has earned a rest, don't you think? Well, things did seem pretty good for a while. New games were released, new Pokemons were revealed, Ash Ketchum traveled around the world, and all in all, things became pretty routine. But a little over a decade after the first wave of Pokemon panic, PETA would put Pokemon in its crosshairs and released Pokemon Black and Blue, a parody game coinciding with the release of the non-parody games Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. The copyright lawsuit waiting to happen took Nintendo to task for the way Pokemon had been treated over the years, rehashing the argument that trainers battling Pokemon was tantamount to animal abuse. You'll be shocked to hear that Pokemon Black and Blue was not a very pleasant game to play in general, but it couldn't have come at a worse time, because if the Black and Blue game creators had done an ounce of research into Pokemon Black and White or its sequels, they would have learned that the moral ambiguity around capturing and battling Pokemon is the literal theme of the games. Pokemon Black and White centers on an organization trying to free Pokemon from their masters. The main argument of the plot is proving that the bond between Pokemon and trainer is good-natured and special after all. And that isn't the first time this Pokehaters complaints have been addressed in the games themselves. The gambling thing? Pokemon originally had a trainer classification called Gambler, one that they'd eventually phase out along with other gambling aspects because the Pan-European Game Information Organization figured that people might not be thrilled about it. After the seizures, the Pokemon anime would never use that type of animation again. The card games doesn't promote bullying or stealing cards, no matter how many trading pits supposedly popped up on playgrounds. Heck, the Pokemon series doesn't promote mean behaviors of any kind, and nearly every single episode ends with folks getting along. And the violence? Well, Ash Ketchum can't stop getting into plot lines where he learns not to push his Pokemons too hard and take good care of his injured ones. Okay, so we're good, right? It's been settled and that Pokemon is awesome and that it isn't the moral scourge of pop culture. Right? Oh. Yeah, right. We haven't talked about Pokemon Go. You already know that Pokemon Go is one of the most famous mobile games of all time. By 2020, it had over 1 billion global downloads and has grossed $3.7 billion in revenue, which is more than every Shrek film combined, just to give you context. Shouts out to Shrek. I learned all the words to Smash Mouth hit single All-Star, thanks to Shrek. But with every popular new thing comes a lot of panic. First of all, people had to be told to stop playing Pokemon Go near railroad tracks or other dangerous places. They also had to be told to stop playing the game while driving because, of course, thousands of people were doing that. And these warnings weren't exactly undeserved. 2 men fell dozens of feet off a cliff and had to be taken to the hospital after being distracted by Pokemon Go. A woman was killed in Japan by a driver too focused on Pokemon Go to watch the road. But Pokemon Go mishaps weren't only user error. The Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. tried desperately to get Pokestops removed from their premises because that's definitely not the place to be throwing Pokeballs. But the most unintentionally quaint backlash comes from a Belgian town called Gerbis, which banned groups of 10 people or more in certain areas. Why? Because people were all clustering around, making noise, and taking up all the parking spaces while playing Pokemon Go. So why has Pokemon inspired such varied forms of panic over the last 2+ decades? Why have people made such a big deal about a game where you gather a team of 6 critters and walk through the weeds with them? Well, in some specific cases, a big deal needed to be made. The anime episode that caused seizures set a standard for safer animations on one of the most popular cartoons on television. The Burger King incident forced the company to rethink the way they made kids' toys, and the US Consumer Protection and Safety Commissions took a deeper look at their guidelines as well. Now, the script was meant to end here, but I have some issues that I need to speak on. The real controversial aspect that no parent committee or any popes have even talked about. And that's how in Pokemon, kids are just sent out of their homes at like 14 to go get these pocket monsters that are definitely not pocket-sized. Well, some are, but most of them aren't harmless. I'll tell you what. Also, think about how crazy it is. Think about how crazy it is that a 14-year-old can just go out and catch God. And apparently God is a normal type. Also, all of the ghost type Pokemons have terrifying descriptions and stories. Like Banette from 3rd gen is just Pokemon Chucky. Drifloon from 4th gen looks cute, right? Well, this thing apparently tries to lift up children and send them to their deaths. And Gengar from the original 1st gen has an interesting Pokedex description on Pokemon Moon. It says, it apparently wishes for a traveling companion since it was once human itself. It tries to create one by taking the lives of other humans. So Gengar was human. So I looked into this. So there's quite a bit of ghost type Pokemon that are said to be from the spirits of dead people. Also, speaking of that, Kadabra is also rumored in the Pokemon universe to have once been a boy with great psychic abilities that was turned into a Pokemon. So it begs the question, are all Kadabras just little Akira level Esper kids turned Pokemon? Or do Kadabras clone themselves? Who the hell knows? Anyhow, I forgot what I was going with this, but listen, this is the end of the Pokemon Panic video. Time for the classic ending talk. You know the drill. If you haven't clicked the subscribe button, press that, and once these rectangles pop up, you can check them out, check out some other videos that we have. Hope you guys have a good one, and let me know down in the comments which is your favorite Pokemon. Now, I don't have the number one best Pokemon in my book, but I do love Slackoth. They are simply adorable, and I respect the way they live their lives. Now I shall end this with the Pokemon rap. I want to be the best there ever was, to beat all the rest, yeah, that's my cause. Electro, Diglett, Nidoran, Mankey, Venusaur, Rattata, Fearow, Pidgey, Seaking, Jolteon, Dragonite, Ghastly, Ponyta, Vaporeon, Poliwrath, Butterfree, catch 'em, gotta catch 'em all. Pokemon, I'll search across the land, look far and wide, release from my hand the power that's inside. Venomoth, Poliwag, Nidorino, Golduck, Ivysaur, Grimer, Victreebel, Voltress, Nidoking, Farfetch, Abra, Jigglypuff, Kingler, Rhyhorn, Clefable, Wigglytuff. Catch 'em, gotta catch 'em all. Gotta catch 'em all. Pokemon.